Hour number 3 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio. I'm Ravi, Lulla, Andrew Rogers here with me on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and of course for hour number 3, we're on KFOR in Lincoln as well. Also on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Wherever you're listening, we are brought to you by our friends at Pratt Dental. Pratt Dental located in North Platte, Nebraska. They are certified in the BioClear method and modern smile design, which can correct many aesthetic dilemmas in a permanent and less invasive manner than traditional treatments such as crowns. You can do it in less time, less waiting, fewer appointments. You can get multiple restorations done in the same day. Make sure you check out prattdental.com/bioclear-dental-treatment or go to prattdental.com, Pratt, go to their services and click on the BioClear treatment. Pratt Dental, creating healthy smiles. A guy that's always got a nice, healthy smile for us is our friend Michael Bruntz from Husker 24/7. Bruntz, what's going on, buddy?
Not much. How you guys doing?
Good morning, Bruntsy. We are doing pretty well. After the kind of whirlwind, I know signing day can be for those of you in the recruiting website world. How you feeling this morning after Nebraska got obviously Dylan Raiola and then a few key flips as well?
Yeah, it's I have to say, just from a purely just worried about me point of view, it was kind of nice that Raiola announced on Monday when he did, because it kind of let everything breathe a little bit. So selfishly, that was okay with me. But yeah, I mean, things went Nebraska's way. I don't think any of those were particularly big surprises. Like Amari Sanders had been committed to Nebraska for over a month and was just waiting to go public with it. Larry Tarver had kind of been, expected to flip as well. So, it was as much of a kind of a stress-free signing day as you can have when you have, like, 4 guys commit with the Bly Hill. But, I think that's partially, due to the way that Nebraska recruits now. The bulk of their class was done in July, before they even set foot on campus for fall camp. So that helps kind of, make things a little bit calmer. But, after that little, week hiccup where all of a sudden Dylan Raiola was visiting and, you had some question about what Daniel Kalen was going to do. Everything just kind of, got back to normal and tied up with a nice little bow.
Bruntsy, how is Dylan Raiola's move not just a major one nationally for Nebraska's outlook, but also great just for the sport of college football to show that it's okay not to go to we'll call them 5 powerhouse schools if you want to make a name for yourself?
Yeah, I think there's been a little bit of a kind of a democratization of the 5 stars with NIL and that kind of thing. I think there's probably a little bit more of, look, like, especially at the quarterback spot, you can't load up in one place. I mean, there's only one guy can play. There's only one football. And if you're a highly ranked quarterback and you want to play early, you kind of got to pick your spot. And, there's only, one guy that can go to Georgia, one guy that can go to Alabama. And, I think that's kind of helped with kind of spreading the wealth a little bit. So I think it's good. I mean, it's the quarterback recruiting piece has been so interesting the last few years because, basically if a guy doesn't start his first 2 years at a place, he's probably not going to still be there. You still saw this year a ton of guys that, started significant games for their teams as freshmen, hit the portal and move on. So it's fascinating. I think, him coming to Nebraska, though, I think, Nebraska's been down for a long time, and that certainly changes the narrative a little bit for what the short-term trajectory can be, I think, for the program.
We're talking with Michael Bruntz of Husker 24/7. Bruntz, do you think, you kind of mentioned the democratization of the 5 stars a little bit. Do you think as we continue into the NIL era, the transfer era, and now we we sprinkle in the 12-team playoff era where all of a sudden access to a championship is more available than it's ever been. Do you think we will continue to see that trend in that direction?
That's a good question. I mean, I think with the playoff, you kind of need to see it play out once to kind of see what that's actually going to look like, at least from the perspective of a recruit, right? Like, it's one thing if a coach says, "Yeah, come to this school, we'll go 9-3, and we'll be in the playoff." You kind of want to see that happen, because otherwise it just kind of sounds like a recruiting pitch right now. But yeah, I mean, I think that'll play into it. I mean, with the NIL stuff, does that eventually go in-house with NCAA changes? I mean, that can very well shift things as well. So, there's not a lot of solid ground right now, I feel like, in college football, and certainly the playoffs a piece of it. I mean, are we going to get a split altogether of football and what that looks like? I mean, there's, it feels like year to year almost. You just can't count on a lot right now being long term in college football. But I think a lot of that stuff does kind of benefit a place like Nebraska, because it does I think play to some advantages that a place like Nebraska has.
Bruntzy, let's go back to signing day for a moment. Statewide, who do you predict to have the biggest impact right away for this Nebraska football program, whether it's an immediate need or someone you just expect to be a difference maker early? Who do you predict that is?
Yeah.
And maybe take Dylan Raiola out of this conversation.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to take the layup. I want to drive to the hoop and get the contact here.
He wants the and one. He wants the hoop and the harm here.
Yeah. Give me the charity stripe extra.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, I'm trying to think of the guys who are going to be on campus in January, because that's such a key piece of being able to play early, I think. And, I think a guy in the class that is going to maybe have something to say for, this season is Ja'Cory Barney. A wide receiver who played wide receiver, played some quarterback. Like, he did a little bit of everything. He's just a good football player, a tough football player. And, he's going to have to add some weight, but, that's one position where I think you look at it and, they're not going to be afraid to play a guy if he's ready, just because I still think there's going to be the depth chart there is going to still be a little bit thin. So I'll say Ja'Cory Barney is a guy that I'm watching very closely and will be in spring, because I think he's got a chance to come in and help right away. The class is interesting because it was huge on offensive linemen. We'd have 6 or 7 offensive linemen in the class. Those guys typically don't get on the field early, so that doesn't help you much there. You only got one quarterback that can play. And, I just think a lot of it's going to kind of be more of a developmental class, even though, Nebraska showed that they're willing to get guys on the field early as freshmen at certain spots. But I would kind of lean Barney at wide receiver. I think he's going to be a guy to watch.
Yeah, Barney was a name that stuck out to me as well. And then one other name that I'm curious what your thoughts are, Coach Rule brought up yesterday, they talked about Carter Nelson being in kind of a San Francisco 49ers role. And I'm sure most people thought Kittle when they thought tight end Carter Nelson. I thought Kyle Juszczyk, because the way they used to use him before Christian McCaffrey came around, he got lined up all over the field. H-back, running back, tight end, out wide sometimes. Like, could you see somebody with that versatile skill set maybe make an impact right away? Or because of where he's coming from in terms of level of competition, being an 8-man, which is just, it's a different game. Do you think maybe he takes a little longer?
That was the only reason that I didn't say him right away, was I think there's going to be a little bit of an adjustment coming from 8-man to 11. And I think he can figure it out. He's a freak athlete. Like, there's that's not taking anything away from him. I'm kind of curious to see. He's going to be at the All-American Bowl in a couple of weeks here against, the country's best. And I'm eager to kind of see how he holds up. Because I think, he has the skill set and, the way that they can potentially use him on offense and what they've talked about, that's intriguing to me. And that I think sometimes too, if you can carve out a spot for a guy and you can say, this is what your role is going to be, and we want you to do this really well, I think that simplifies things a bit. I mean, I think I'd be a little bit more ready to say, like, he's a day one contributor if he were coming in the spring. Because I think that just kind of puts you behind a little bit. He's going to have to put on some weight, I think, to kind of do what they want him to. But yeah, I mean, I think in terms of just offensive pieces, I mean, he was by far the biggest get. Whether that's H-back, running back, tight end, wide receiver, wherever. I'm eager to see what they kind of do with him because it's funny that the Raiola signing kind of overshadowed everything, but I mean, that was a real elbows out recruiting win that Nebraska had there. I mean, I think it probably gets lost because he's an in-state kid and had been committed for so long, but they really did a good job of getting that one over the finish line.
Yeah, I mean, he finished the year number 43 according to your 24/7 sports rankings in the country. So that's a pretty good number there, getting a top 50 guy. I'm curious what you think, because Coach Rule talking about the defensive backs and all the defensive backs that they've brought into the room, because they brought a ton of tight ends in, they brought a ton of offensive linemen in, they also brought a ton of defensive backs. Out of this group, do you look at any of those guys and say, hey, that's a day one contributor? And also, do you look at any of those guys as obvious examples of people that might get put into maybe linebacker positions or edge rusher positions the way that Coach Rule was talking about?
Yeah, no, of the guys, I mean, I think they're a little thin still on true corners. I could see Mario Buford, potentially getting in the conversation early on. He's going to be an early enrollee, played at a really high level in Texas for his time down there. I think, if you've been around his brother at all, there's a maturity there that you don't often see in young college kids, which I think helps too. So I think he's a guy that you could see on the field sooner than later. In terms of guys that could kind of grow into linebackers, I mean, a Braylon Prude, I mean, I know that we list him as a safety, but I think he eventually lands at linebacker. He's, 6'3", 6'4", and can run. I know he had just an absolutely horrific injury his senior year, but Rex Guthrie is probably going to slide into that Isaac Gifford role by the time everything's said and done as a rover, maybe a smaller linebacker. He's just a prolific tackler, had over 120 tackles as a junior out in Colorado. He'll be on campus early rehabbing from a dislocated ankle and a broken bone in his leg. Like, it was pretty bad. So that'll sort itself out. I think, they need a lot of defensive backs. They're trying to increase competition in that group. And the way they recruit guys, I mean, it's a guy could end up as a safety. Maybe he's a corner. I mean, you saw what they did with, Malcolm Hartzog, moving him back and forth. And they've had guys in the past like Quentin Newsom that have kind of done that if needed. So I think it sorts itself out. I think they're also just kind of trying to find guys who have a ton of upside. I mean, Amari Sanders is another guy who hasn't played a ton of football, could be a corner, maybe a safety at some point, but just a rangy guy that can run. I mean, that's what the staff looks for is traits and attributes in that secondary, and I think they got a lot of those types of guys.
Bruntz, you mentioned the linebacker position. What was your reaction to the Eric Fields news yesterday? I mean, that's a player I thought had tremendous athletic ability and definitely was one of the more intriguing commits of the 2023 class. Did that update come as a complete surprise to you as well?
We had kind of been hearing that was not trending well in terms of him staying on campus. He hadn't really dressed out for any games early in the year. I was going back and looking through what we'd written about him in fall camp, and I think there was a lot of excitement about him, but you didn't hear him mentioned as the year went on, and that's never usually a good sign. And he went home. He's not in the transfer portal. And I mean, you guys remember last year at National Signing Day, Matt Rule singled him out and basically said, like, you're going to know who Eric Fields is. And I think he's a tremendously talented defensive player. It just, for whatever reason, didn't mesh with him in Lincoln. And, maybe that's, I don't know if there's, stuff going on there, what happened, but yeah, I think he was a guy that was the staff viewed as a very, very high upside guy, and somebody that, eventually would have been, that Isaac Gifford type role, or maybe growing into a little bit bigger linebacker. So, I think there's a little bit of disappointment over there in North Stadium that didn't work out, because I think they felt like they got a guy that was very, very under the radar.
We're talking with Michael Bruntz of Husker 24/7. Speaking of under the radar, Bruntz, are there any kind of sleepers from this 2024 class that you're low key pretty excited about?
Yeah, it's an interesting class. I got to see Landon Davidson, the offensive lineman from Colorado, play earlier this fall, and he earned his offer at camp. Had a little bit of recruiting juice behind his name, but not a ton.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think he profiles really well to a guard. At some point, I think, a lot of these offensive linemen, they did a pretty good job of bringing in some a good mix of interior guys, a couple tackles. And I think that's probably, I would say that group is probably the strength of the class. I think there's some guys that can play earlier in their careers. You've got a really, really high upside guy, Grant Bricks, in that class that was coveted by pretty much everybody that matters, a top 247 player. And then I think another guy in that kind of offensive line group that, because of when he committed, because of where he lives, it just isn't getting talked about much, is Preston Taumua, the offensive lineman out of Hawaii. Nebraska beat out Oregon, Auburn, and Arizona for this kid. I talked to him the other night. He's 6'4", 320 pounds right now. Could play tackle if they need him to, but he's probably a guard. And, I think that was a really big recruiting win for Nebraska. I don't think that he expected going into his visits that he was going to end up with Nebraska, but they beat out those programs for him. And, he's coming off of a knee injury. He played the second half of his season in Hawaii, won a state championship, but he's a sharp kid. He'll be here in the summer, and another kid that, with the offensive line group the way it is, you've got a lot of veterans like Ben Hart, Ben Scott, and those guys, and then they're going to have to pass that off to some of these young guys that came in last year and this year. And I think this line class that they have is going to be really important for kind of that next wave of starting offensive linemen in Nebraska.
Brunty, speaking of linemen from Colorado, Jordan Seaton's name has kind of been hitting the skies, right? Everybody's like, what's going on with Jordan Seaton? And Nebraska is somebody that is in the Seaton mix right now. What is the latest on him?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of the last couple of days before National Signing Day, there'd been a lot of momentum for him to Maryland. Kind of away from Colorado. I know he visited Oregon. Dylan Raiola is trying to get in there and do some peer recruiting. And that's the benefit of having a 5-star quarterback in your class. People notice that gets your DMs and your text read a little bit more quickly, I think. So, they're going to take their shot at it. We'll see how it goes. But, yeah, I don't know. Those recruitments that kind of go on for, a couple days after National Signing Day, things like that, it always gives me a little bit of pause. Certainly a talented prospect, but, I kind of wonder whether, how much Matt Rule and his staff kind of have a stomach for that kind of thing. So we'll see. He's a talented kid. Nebraska's going to take their shot, but yeah. Anyways, we'll see. But last I knew, Maryland was still kind of trending with him and kind of away from Colorado.
Bruntz, who's the local media version of the guy that gets your text message read a little bit faster?
That text me that I take a look at.
Yeah, let's say, if, no offense to Danny Kaelin, if Danny Kaelin texts you, you look at it, maybe you respond if you think about it. But if Dylan Raiola texts you, you're like, oh, okay. Who's the Dylan Raiola of you get the text from local media and you're like, all right, let's do this.
That's a good question. I don't want to leave anybody out.
Shane Schillerberg.
Listen,
Yeah.
Bruntz, it's okay. Everybody's a 4-star here. We just want to know who the 5-star is.
Yeah.
Oh, come on, Shane.
I think here's what you get. I look at a little bit faster.
Okay.
If you get the Keith Mann text out of the blue, and that's not local media, but if you get the Keith Mann text out of the blue, you're like, okay, what's going on here? What do I need to know about? Where do I need to be at what time? That's when I usually my ears perk up a little bit. So that's what I'll go with. I'll go right down the middle. The Keith Mann text. It's not.
You can't pick the or. You can't pick the or. It can't be Ravi or Andrew, and you choose or. Like, that's not allowed.
Not a depth chart. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm gonna let you off the hook. You're being diplomatic.
I'll say this: it used to be Andrew back when he was giving me some first inning picks. So,
Hey, that is always a thrilling message to receive.
The first inning overs. Let's go, baby.
I get like some inside info that the starting pitcher for the Cardinals is like dealing with a family thing. He might not be dialed in the first inning.
I got you. I'll catch you back up. I'll get you back up to speed once baseball season rolls in.
Nice.
Hey, quick one here before we let you go, Bruntz. You got about a minute and a half. I'm going to ask you a Christmas-themed question. I've been doing it with every guest today. Okay, you ready?
Okay. Yep.
Which Christmas movie character, I should say, do you think you'd get along with the most, and why?
Let's see here. I would say Clark Griswold.
I knew it. I knew it.
The older I've gotten, the more I've come to understand and appreciate his viewpoint on life. So I would say Clark Griswold.
I knew he was going to go that direction. I'm like, man, Bruntz seems like a Clark Griswold guy.
Yeah. I think I've begun to appreciate that more. So I would say Clark Griswold probably. Although we've never done like the huge like hosting thing because I can't be part of that. So
Your bonus check wasn't a year-long membership to the Jelly of the Month Club.
Yeah.
Bruntz, we appreciate it. We'll be off next week, so we won't get a chance to talk to you. But happy holidays, and we will talk to you in the new year.
You too, guys. Take care. Have a good one. All right?
See you, man.
That's Michael Bruntz from Husker 24/7. Appreciate Bruntsy and his willingness to let us be a little goofy there as we wrap up his segment. Coming up next, we're going to get to Hurrdat Hot Seat as we wrap up the show, the last half hour here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back.